Don't look away, because the moment you do, something irreversible happens. The words were barely a whisper carried by the wind across the Silver Ridge Pack grounds, where dozens of wolves stood in a tight circle beneath the pale morning sky, their attention fixed on the center of the clearing. Emma Carter stood at the edge of that circle, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, as if holding herself together was the only thing keeping her from disappearing entirely. She was an Omega, and in Silver Ridge, that meant silence, distance, and obedience. Around her, voices murmured with cold indifference as a wounded wolf was brought forward, its body trembling and unsteady as it was guided, almost pushed, into the center of the gathering. No one stepped closer than necessary. No one spoke with kindness. The message was unspoken but clear. It did not belong here anymore. The wolf's breathing was uneven, its coat dull with dust and exhaustion, its eyes half-lowered, as if even lifting its gaze required too much strength. Someone in the crowd muttered that it should be left beyond the border, that weakness had no place in pack law. Emma felt those words like a weight pressing against her chest, heavier than fear itself. She took one step forward before she realized she had moved at all. A nearby alpha turned his head sharply, his expression warning her without words to stay back where she belonged. But Emma's eyes were not on him. They were on the wounded creature struggling to remain upright. Something inside her, something quiet but unyielding, refused to accept the idea of walking away. Slowly, she moved again, this time deliberately, crossing the invisible boundary that separated obedience from defiance. A few gasps followed her movement, subtle but sharp enough to cut through the air. The injured wolf lowered its head further as if bracing for rejection, but Emma knelt instead, her movements careful, non-threatening, her voice barely above a breath as she spoke, not to the pack, but to the creature itself. "You're safe," she said softly, though she wasn't sure if she was speaking the truth or simply hoping it into existence. Behind her, tension shifted. Someone laughed under their breath, dismissing her actions as foolishness. Others watched with cold curiosity, waiting to see how quickly she would be corrected, how swiftly the rules would be enforced. Emma lifted her hand slowly, stopping just short of touching the wolf, giving it the choice to accept her or reject her presence. For a brief moment, everything in the clearing seemed to hold its breath with her. And far beyond the edge of the Silver Ridge territory, unseen by anyone present, a presence stirred, silent, observant, and aware. Cale Blackwood had not intended to interfere, only to observe. But what he saw held his attention longer than it should have. An Omega who did not step back. A wounded wolf that did not flee. And a moment that did not belong to ordinary fate. Emma did not know it yet, but the choice she had just made would not remain small for long. In a world where even mercy was measured by rank, she had crossed into something far more dangerous than disobedience. She had been seen. The silence that followed her words did not last long. It never did in Silver Ridge. Emma Carter remained kneeling for a moment longer than necessary, her hands hovering just above the injured wolf as if the air itself had become heavier around her. The creature's breathing was uneven, but steadier now, as though her presence alone had disrupted the cold expectation of abandonment that had filled the clearing only moments before. Behind her, the pack shifted uneasily. It was not common for an Omega to step forward without permission, and even rarer for anyone to challenge the unspoken rule that weakness should be left behind. A low voice cut through the stillness, sharp with disbelief. "Step away from it." Emma did not turn immediately. Her attention remained on the wolf, on the subtle rise and fall of its chest, on the way its eyes followed her carefully now instead of drifting away in resignation. "It is injured," she said softly, as if stating a fact that should have required no defense. "It should not be abandoned." A faint ripple of laughter moved through the crowd, not loud enough to be kind, not soft enough to be ignored. Another voice followed, colder, sharper. "That is not your concern." Emma finally lifted her gaze. Standing just beyond the circle was a young alpha from the pack, his posture rigid with authority that had never been questioned before. His expression carried the expectation of obedience, the kind that had shaped every interaction within Silver Ridge. But Emma did not lower her eyes. For a brief moment, something unfamiliar passed through the clearing. Not defiance shouted or declared, but quiet refusal. She shifted slightly, placing herself between the injured wolf and the approaching figures. "If no one helps it," she said, her voice steady despite the tension pressing in from every direction, "then it will not survive." The words hung in the air, simple and undeniable. The alpha's jaw tightened. Around them, the pack members exchanged glances, as if waiting for the inevitable correction that should follow such behavior. But none came. Instead, the wounded wolf made a small sound, almost imperceptible, and leaned forward slightly toward Emma, as if recognizing something in her that others did not see. A strange stillness settled over the clearing. Even the wind seemed to hesitate. Emma lowered her hand slowly this time, allowing it to rest near the wolf's head without force, without demand. The creature did not pull away. That small acceptance shifted something deeper than words could express. And beyond the borders of Silver Ridge, where the forest thickened and shadows moved with their own quiet rhythm, Cale Blackwood remained still. He had seen countless moments of dominance and submission in his lifetime, but this was neither. It was not rebellion for attention, nor weakness disguised as courage. It was something else entirely, something that did not belong easily within the rules of packs or ranks. His gaze remained fixed on the figure of the Omega who refused to step back, as if observing a line being drawn in a place where lines were never meant to exist. And for the first time in a long while, Cale did not look away. The clearing had begun to feel different in a way no one could immediately explain. Emma Carter stayed where she was, still kneeling near the injured wolf, her posture steady even, as the weight of every stair in Silver Ridge pressed against her like an invisible wall. The air was no longer just morning air. It felt charged, as if the moment itself had become aware of its own importance. The wolf beside her shifted slightly, its breathing still uneven but calmer than before, as though the simple act of not being abandoned had changed something fundamental in its will to endure. Emma did not speak now. Words felt unnecessary, fragile against the quiet tension building around her. The alpha who had spoken earlier took a step forward again, slower this time, as if recalculating the situation in real time. His eyes flicked from Emma to the wolf and back again, searching for the correct response within the rules he had always known. But nothing in those rules accounted for what he was seeing. An Omega refusing to retreat. A wounded creature refusing to collapse. A crowd refusing to intervene as certainty itself began to fracture. Emma finally placed her hand lightly on the ground beside the wolf, not restraining it, not claiming it, only offering presence. "You are not alone," she whispered, the words almost lost beneath the sound of distant wind moving through the trees. It was not a declaration meant for the pack, yet it reached them anyway. A few of the younger wolves exchanged uneasy glances, their confidence wavering in small, almost invisible ways. Authority in Silver Ridge had always depended on silence from those below it. And Emma Carter was no longer silent in the way they expected. Beyond the boundary of the clearing, deeper within the forest where the trees thickened and the light fractured into shadows, Cale Blackwood remained still. He had not moved since the moment the Omega stepped forward. There were few things in the world that could hold the attention of someone who had long since grown accustomed to power, but this was not power in the traditional sense. It was something quieter, something that did not demand recognition yet received it anyway. Cale's gaze followed the subtle shifts in the clearing, the hesitation in voices, the disruption of certainty. He understood dominance. He understood fear. But what he was witnessing now was neither. It was choice, made without permission and sustained without protection. The injured wolf let out a soft sound and leaned closer to Emma, pressing its weight gently toward her as if anchoring itself to something it could not define. Emma did not flinch. She adjusted slightly, offering stability without hesitation, her focus entirely on the life in front of her rather than the judgment surrounding her. That, more than anything else, held Cale's attention. Not the act itself, but the absence of hesitation within it. A voice finally broke through the tension from within the pack, lower than the others, uncertain but sharp enough to demand attention. "This is not how things are done." Emma did not respond immediately. She looked down at the wolf, then lifted her gaze toward the group. "Then perhaps," she said quietly, "it is time to understand why it should be." The words did not carry aggression. They carried something far more unsettling, certainty without permission. For a brief moment, no one moved. Even the wind seemed to pause again, as if the forest itself was listening more closely now. And in the distance, Cale Blackwood took a single step forward, not into the clearing, not yet, but closer than before, as if the boundary between observation and involvement had begun to blur in a way that could not be undone. Emma Carter's hands hovered just above the wounded wolf, feeling the faint warmth of its small body through the coarse fur, her mind racing with questions she had never allowed herself to consider before. Every breath she took seemed amplified by the stillness of the clearing, the usual chatter of the pack members fading into a distant hum as if the world had narrowed to the two of them. She adjusted her weight slightly, keeping herself steady, and whispered softly, "You can trust me," though it was more a statement of intent than a promise. The wolf's ears flicked at her voice, and for a fleeting moment, its eyes met hers with something like recognition, a silent communication bridging the distance between species and rank. From the edge of the clearing, the pack's young alphas shifted uneasily, their certainty fracturing as they observed Emma's unwavering focus. She was doing what none of them would, or perhaps could, and in that quiet defiance, a new rhythm emerged within the space, measured not by dominance or fear, but by attention, presence, and care. She lowered herself slowly to make herself smaller, to be less imposing, more a part of the moment than apart from it, and the wolf inched closer, placing a tentative weight against her side. The connection was subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone not paying close attention, but Emma felt it with every fiber of her being, a gentle affirmation that her actions mattered. Somewhere in the shadows beyond the line of pack members, Cale Blackwood's presence remained, unseen but palpably near, his eyes tracking every movement, every decision, every nuanced shift in posture or expression. He did not speak. He did not intervene. His attention alone was enough to heighten the intensity, a silent witness that carried the weight of authority without a single word. Emma, unaware of the observer just beyond the tree line, continued her careful ministrations, her movements deliberate, her focus entirely on sustaining calm, offering support, and ensuring that the wolf's trembling did not escalate into fear. The pack's murmurs began to quiet further, the younger members lowering their heads slightly as they recognized that Emma's choice had shifted the energy of the gathering, that there was a measure of respect, however reluctant, due to the courage it took to act against expectation. She breathed in slowly, grounding herself, her senses attuned to every subtle sound, the rustle of leaves under distant paws, the flutter of wings overhead, the faint movement of the injured wolf as it adjusted its stance. Emma felt a warmth build within her chest, an unspoken assurance that even in a world ruled by hierarchy, small acts of care had power. She spoke again, voice steady and soft. "I will not let you face this alone." And the wolf, leaning into her presence, seemed to draw strength from the declaration. And in that quiet, fragile, unassuming way, a shift occurred. It was not loud or dramatic, but it was definitive, a turning point that rippled through the clearing. Cale Blackwood's gaze lingered, thoughtful and measured, acknowledging without interruption the choice, the courage, and the integrity he had witnessed. Emma's heart beat in rhythm with the wolf's slow, steady breaths, each pulse reinforcing the silent promise she had made, not only to the creature at her side, but to herself. The clearing, once dominated by expectation and rigid hierarchy, now held a new energy, a potential for change that hung in the morning air like the first light of dawn breaking through dense forest canopy, signaling the beginning of something neither Emma nor anyone present could yet fully comprehend. The forest clearing seemed to hold its breath as Emma Carter carefully adjusted the wolf's position, making certain that it was stable and comfortable, her own heartbeat echoing in her ears in time with the soft, uneven breaths of the creature beside her. She felt the tension around them shift slightly, a subtle acknowledgement that her actions were no longer invisible, that the quiet insistence of care could bend the expectations of the pack in small but undeniable ways. Emma's eyes traced the edges of the circle, noting the uncertain stances, the hesitant movements, and the slight hesitation in the youngest alphas who had been certain a moment ago that she would retreat. She could feel the weight of every gaze, yet the pressure did not break her. It was as if a boundary had formed, invisible but palpable, between what was expected and what was right, and she stood firmly on the side of what was right. The wolf stirred again, nudging gently against her, and she allowed herself the smallest smile, a gesture of reassurance for both of them. Somewhere beyond the tree-line, Cale Blackwood's eyes remained fixed, sharp and assessing, taking in the way her hands moved, the way her voice remained calm and steady, the way she communicated without words the simple truth that care was not weakness. The murmur of the pack grew quieter, replaced by the subtle, almost imperceptible acknowledgement that Emma Carter's choice carried weight far beyond her rank. She spoke softly, words meant more for grounding than for explanation. "It will be all right. I will not leave you." The wolf responded with a quiet shift, leaning closer, and Emma felt a flicker of warmth, a connection that did not require any approval from the others. The alphas shifted again, some stepping back as if realizing that interfering might disrupt the fragile balance now forming. The air felt different, charged not with authority or challenge, but with recognition, a sense that the rules were being rewritten in the smallest, quietest way. Emma's focus never wavered. She adjusted her hands slightly, ensuring the wolf remained steady, and allowed her voice to convey calm assurance as she whispered, "You are safe now." Even those in the back of the circle could sense the change, the subtle shift in the clearing as uncertainty replaced certainty, and for a brief moment, the hierarchy seemed less rigid, more permeable. Beyond the tree line, Cale moved slightly forward, remaining unseen but closer than before, absorbing every detail, noting the courage and clarity with which Emma acted. The wind rustled through the leaves, carrying with it the faint scent of damp earth and pine, and in that quiet movement, Emma felt an unexpected sense of solidarity with the wolf at her side. The creature's small, cautious gestures mirrored her own, and together, they formed a rhythm of trust, one that did not require permission, one that defied expectation without confrontation. In that instant, Emma Carter understood that even in a world governed by pack rules and rigid hierarchies, quiet choices could resonate powerfully, that standing firm in compassion could command attention in ways that neither argument nor authority ever could. And in the distance, unseen but entirely present, Cale Blackwood continued to watch, his presence a silent affirmation of what had already begun to shift. The tension in the clearing had shifted into something quieter, more unstable, as if the air itself no longer knew which direction it was supposed to move. Emma Carter remained focused on the injured wolf, her hands steady despite the growing awareness that every action she took was now being measured, judged, and silently recorded by the pack around her. The creature beside her had begun to settle into a fragile calm, its breathing no longer as erratic, its body responding to her presence in small but meaningful ways. Emma did not rush. She had learned instinctively that trust, once broken, could not be rebuilt through speed or force. Around her, the pack members no longer spoke as freely. Their earlier certainty had dissolved into hesitation, replaced by watchfulness that bordered on confusion. It was not just her actions that unsettled them, but the absence of a clear consequence. In Silver Ridge, every deviation from expectation had always been corrected swiftly. Yet here she remained, unpunished, unchanged, and still kneeling beside the wounded wolf as if her place had always been there. Emma lowered her gaze slightly, brushing a hand just above the wolf's shoulder, feeling the subtle rise and fall of its breath stabilize further. The connection was not spoken, not declared, but it was undeniable in its simplicity. The wolf leaned closer again, this time without hesitation, pressing into her side with a faint sense of safety that seemed almost impossible given its condition. Emma exhaled slowly, a quiet release of tension she had not fully realized she was holding. For a moment, everything narrowed to this single exchange of trust. And then, without warning, the atmosphere changed again. It was subtle at first, like pressure shifting in the air before a storm breaks. Conversation stopped entirely. Even the youngest members of the pack went still. Emma noticed it only when the wolf beside her lifted its head slightly, ears twitching toward the edge of the forest. She followed its instinctive response, her eyes lifting as well, and that was when she felt it. Presence. Not loud, not announced, but absolute. Cale Blackwood stepped forward from the tree line with the kind of silence that did not belong to hesitation, but to certainty. He did not immediately enter the circle. He simply stood at its edge, observing, his gaze locked not on the pack, but on Emma. The shift in attention was immediate. Those who had been uncertain now became rigid, aware that something far greater than internal pack hierarchy had entered their space. Emma did not move away. She did not rise. She simply met the presence with quiet awareness, her posture unchanged, her attention still anchored to the injured wolf even as she acknowledged, without words, that something significant had arrived. Cale's expression remained unreadable, but his focus was precise. He observed the way she did not break contact with the creature at her side, the way she remained steady despite the weight of attention now pressing in from all directions. There was no urgency in his movements, no visible reaction from the others that he acknowledged. Instead, his silence carried its own authority, reshaping the space without requiring a single command. Emma felt it instinctively, a subtle recalibration of everything around her. The pack members were no longer watching her alone. They were watching him. And in that shift, something unspoken settled over the clearing. The injured wolf made a faint sound, drawing Emma's attention back for a moment, grounding her in the present despite the overwhelming presence now standing at the edge of her awareness. She adjusted her position slightly, maintaining her focus, refusing to let the change in atmosphere pull her away from what she had chosen to protect. Cale's gaze followed the movement, not missing a single detail, as if measuring not only her actions but the intent behind them. The wind moved through the trees again, softer now, as though even nature had adjusted to the arrival. Emma Carter remained where she was, unaware of the full weight of what had just entered her world, but certain of one thing that required no explanation. Nothing about this moment would remain the same after it. The forest clearing felt suspended in a delicate balance as Emma Carter remained kneeling beside the injured wolf, her focus unwavering despite the palpable tension pressing in from every direction. She could sense the pack members around her, their movements restrained, the usual certainty and arrogance replaced with curiosity and hesitancy. Emma's hands hovered lightly over the creature, providing reassurance without imposing, her fingers tracing subtle patterns along the coarse fur, as if every motion whispered the promise of safety and attention. The wolf's small head lifted slightly, eyes flicking toward her in silent recognition, and a faint sound of acknowledgement escaped its throat, subtle enough to be heard only in the quiet corners of the clearing. The young alphas, previously confident, now exchanged uncertain glances, as if the rules they had internalized no longer applied to this moment. Emma's voice, soft but clear, broke the silence. "You will not be left behind. Not while I am here." Her words were not a demand, nor a challenge. They were a quiet insistence, a moral truth unspoken by the pack until now. The breeze rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of earth, pine, and the faint warmth of the injured wolf, and Emma drew a slow, grounding breath, feeling the rhythm of its heartbeat against her own. Beyond the edges of the clearing, Cale Blackwood remained a silent presence, observing every subtle motion, every nuanced gesture, every quiet decision. His eyes tracked the interaction without distraction, noting how Emma's focus never wavered, how she adjusted instinctively to the wolf's smallest shifts, and how she remained steady despite the weight of attention bearing down upon her. The clearing itself seemed to adjust, the energy bending around her, the pack members becoming aware, without knowing how or why, that the moment had changed. Emma shifted slightly, her hand moving closer to the wolf's side in a gesture of support, and the creature pressed in, leaning gently against her, a wordless confirmation of trust and connection. The light filtered through the canopy, falling in dappled patterns across the clearing, illuminating both Emma and the wolf in a warm, soft glow that seemed to mark the space as different, set apart from expectation or tradition. Emma felt that warmth deep in her chest, a quiet reassurance that her choice mattered, that her decision to act with care rather than obedience had ripple effects far beyond the moment itself. The pack watched, silent and still, as a new understanding passed between them. Strength was not only measured in dominance, but in the courage to protect and the patience to remain present. Cale Blackwood shifted subtly, the weight of his presence acknowledged without interruption, as if the forest itself had recognized his approval of the act without need for words. Emma exhaled slowly, grounding herself again in the rhythm of the wolf beside her. And for the first time that morning, she felt the subtle certainty that she had not only chosen correctly, but had begun to redefine what it meant to act with integrity in a world governed by hierarchy. Every movement, every breath, every small adjustment was observed, measured, and carried forward, leaving a trace of change in the clearing, a quiet testament to courage and attention that even the forest seemed to honor. The clearing no longer felt like a simple gathering place, but like a threshold between what had always been and what was quietly becoming something new. Emma Carter remained kneeling beside the injured wolf, her posture unchanged, though everything around her had shifted in ways she could not fully name. The creature's breathing had steadied further, each inhale and exhale now carrying a fragile consistency that suggested trust had begun to replace fear. Emma kept her movements slow and intentional, her hand resting near the wolf without restraint, allowing it the freedom to choose proximity without pressure. Around her, the pack stood in near silence, their earlier assumptions unraveling under the weight of what they had witnessed. The rules they had followed without question no longer felt absolute. Emma's presence in the center of that uncertainty had become something unavoidable, something that demanded attention even from those who wished to ignore it. She sensed it in the smallest details, the way eyes no longer looked away as quickly, the way voices refused to rise in mockery, the way even the wind seemed to move more carefully through the trees. The wolf beside her let out a faint sound, and she responded with a soft reassurance, her voice steady and calm. "You are still here, and I am still here." It was not a statement meant for the pack, yet it resonated through them anyway, settling into the space between expectation and reality. Beyond the clearing, Cale Blackwood remained an unmoving presence, but the stillness around him was no longer passive. It carried weight, intention, and recognition. His gaze had not left Emma since the moment he arrived, observing not only her actions but the absence of hesitation within them. There was no performance in what she did, no awareness of audience, only consistency in choice and action that did not bend under pressure. The young alphas shifted again, their confidence now replaced with a subtle uncertainty that they could not articulate. Emma Carter had not challenged them directly, yet the foundation of their certainty had begun to fracture nonetheless. The injured wolf pressed closer to her side, and she adjusted slightly to accommodate it, never forcing, never controlling, only responding. That quiet exchange carried more influence than any command spoken within the clearing that morning. Cale took a slow step forward, closer than before, though still outside the circle. The movement was small, but it changed everything. Those nearest to him instinctively straightened, their awareness sharpening as presence alone redefined the space. Emma felt it too, though she did not turn. Her attention remained on the wolf, even as she became fully aware that she was no longer only being observed by the pack, but by something far more decisive. The air felt denser, as if time itself had slowed to accommodate the arrival of consequence. Yet Emma did not retreat, did not shift away, did not acknowledge fear. She simply continued, steady and deliberate, maintaining the fragile trust she had built through nothing more than presence and patience. The wolf's breathing deepened slightly, and in that small change, Emma saw confirmation that her choice had not been in vain. Cale's gaze remained fixed, measuring not her defiance, but her consistency, not her courage in a single moment, but her refusal to abandon it. The clearing held its silence, no longer empty, but full of something unspoken and irreversible. And in that silence, the balance of everything they had known continued to shift, quietly, inevitably, and without permission. The clearing had settled into a silence so complete that even the smallest movement felt significant, as if the forest itself was holding every breath in anticipation of what would happen next. Emma Carter remained kneeling beside the injured wolf, her presence steady and unbroken, her attention unwavering despite the shifting weight of every gaze now directed toward her. The creature beside her had fully settled into contact, no longer trembling in uncertainty, but resting with a fragile sense of trust that seemed almost impossible given the circumstances that had brought it here. Emma's hand remained close, not restraining, not controlling, only offering continuity, a silent promise that she would not withdraw simply because others were watching. Around her, the pack no longer whispered. They no longer speculated. They observed, and in that observation, something fundamental had changed. The certainty that once defined their hierarchy had begun to fracture in subtle ways, replaced by hesitation that none of them seemed prepared to acknowledge. Emma did not look at them. Her focus remained on the life she had chosen to protect, because in her mind, that was the only decision that required clarity. The injured wolf exhaled softly, its body finally no longer resisting the calm that had been offered to it, and Emma responded with a quiet reassurance, her voice low and steady. "You are safe now." The words carried through the clearing in a way that felt unintended yet unavoidable, reaching ears that had not expected to understand them as anything more than sentiment. Beyond the edge of the forest, Cale Blackwood stood in stillness, but his stillness was no longer passive. It was deliberate, measured, and deeply attentive, as if every shift in the clearing was being weighed against something far larger than the present moment. His gaze remained fixed on Emma Carter, not in judgment, but in observation that carried an almost unsettling depth. She had not reacted to his presence the way others did. She had not broken focus, had not sought approval, had not altered her behavior in response to authority. That alone set her apart in a way that could not be ignored. The wind moved gently through the trees, but even that movement felt subdued, as though the forest itself had adjusted to what was unfolding. Emma shifted slightly, adjusting her position so the wolf could remain comfortable, her movements precise and unforced. There was no urgency in her actions, only consistency, and that consistency had become the most noticeable thing in the clearing. The younger alphas, once certain of their place, now stood with subtle tension in their posture, their earlier confidence replaced with a quiet uncertainty they could not yet define. Emma Carter had not challenged them directly, yet something within their understanding of strength had already begun to shift. Cale Blackwood took another step forward, closer now, though still outside the circle. The movement was not abrupt, but it was enough to alter the atmosphere completely. Those nearest to him instinctively became still, their awareness sharpening as his presence became undeniable. Yet even as that pressure settled over the clearing, Emma did not turn. She did not acknowledge it with hesitation or fear. Her attention remained where it had always been, anchored to the injured wolf, as if the presence of authority did not outweigh the responsibility she had already accepted. The wolf leaned closer again, a subtle gesture that confirmed trust, and Emma responded with quiet steadiness, reinforcing that fragile connection through nothing more than presence and patience. Cale's gaze did not waver. He observed everything: the lack of hesitation, the absence of performance, the consistency of care that did not shift under scrutiny. And in that observation, something unspoken formed, not a conclusion, but recognition that what he was witnessing did not belong to the patterns he had known. The clearing remained silent, but it was no longer empty of meaning. It had become a place where something irreversible had already begun, where every breath, every glance, every quiet decision carried weight beyond the moment itself. And as Emma Carter continued to hold her position without retreat, the world around her remained suspended between what it had always been and what it was quietly becoming.